Hey there, interwebs. Welcome back to How Fascinating, and may I just say, Merry Christmas. If we were living in a previous era, the answer to that question might actually be no, but more on that in a moment. For now, imagine a large, boisterous man who breaks into your house with a sack. I know what you're thinking, but no, it isn't Santa Claus. Not today. Instead of leaving behind presents, he starts stealing your things, then he turns on you, and when you try to fight back, he remonstrates you for having the audacity to strike a guest in your home. That's what the modern war on Christmas is like. It's nearly total cultural saturation by an entity bedecked with stolen property, with its current and former victims framed as oppressors. But it wasn't always like that. As a matter of fact, if you think that the phrase Happy Holidays represents a war on Christmas, be glad you don't live in the mid-17th century. Throughout the 1650s, Christmas was completely banned in the British Isles, but not by atheists, Jews, Muslims, or even pagans. It was banned by Christians, but to understand why, let's talk about sex, baby. To begin with, Christianity is a lot like Christmas dinner. It's all one big happy family. Right up until someone mentions politics, at which point voices are raised, names are called, things are said which can't be taken back, someone gets excommunicated, people start debating the literalist interpretation of the transubstantiation of Christ, the world's largest rodent officially gets declared to be a fish, the Medicis play kingmaker with the papacy for a few centuries, the English monarch tries to get a divorce, a new religion forms around some German dude's passive-aggressive post-it note, and Dan Brown writes another book. Basically, that's a wordier way of saying it's complicated. The overly short and simple version of this story is that once upon a time, the Roman Catholic Church was the de facto flavor of British Christianity, but when Pope Clement VII wouldn't grant King Henry VIII an annulment to divorce his current wife, Catherine of Aragon, our boy Big Hank decided to start his own church with blackjack and hookers, or at least more jousting and mistresses, and in 1534 this became the separate Church of England, also known today as Anglicanism. However, despite the formation of the C of E being the catalyst of the English Reformation and one facet of the much broader Protestant Reformation, it was still basically Catholic in all but name because, surprise surprise, Henry also didn't truck with Martin Luther any more than Pope Clement. In fact, Clement was the second of the Medici popes, and his immediate predecessor's predecessor, Leo X, was the first Medici pope and appointed Henry Fide Defensor, or Defender of the Faith, for taking a swing at Lutheranism. The early 1500s were wild, yo. The actual Protestants in England weren't thrilled about this new non-development, and so under the reign of Henry's daughter Elizabeth, the COE was further reformed to better align with their beliefs, and many high-ranking positions within the church went to Calvinists. Now, Calvinism and Lutheranism are both branches of Protestantism, but they differ on certain issues, such as whether or not the Eucharist is the real body of Christ or just a symbolic thing. Incidentally, 3 things my girlfriend won't allow in our household are Ouija boards, essential oil diffusers, and Calvinists. Returning to Elizabethan England, things had become decidedly more Protestant, but not Protestant enough for some. These were the Puritans, and they sought to purge the faith of any and all lingering Roman Catholic practices which they saw as heretical. And yes, one of these practices was the celebration of Christmas. They attacked the holiday as residual papist idolatry, finding it both too Catholic and simultaneously too pagan. I suspect that they also considered it to be too much fun, Puritans being what they were. Actually, to be fair, the Puritans were a tad extreme in their beliefs, but in this case they weren't wholly wrong. It's worth noting that Christmas celebrations then were more like Carnival is now. Lots of partying, drinking, reduced inhibitions, sexual liberties, and role reversal. A later Ordinance of Parliament would deride it as giving liberty to carnal and sensual delights. I love how every time Puritans complain about something, they just make it sound more enjoyable. The Puritans were also quick to point out that the Bible sanctioned no holy days save for the Sabbath, and that the date of December 25th was ahistorical anyway. They argued that the date had nothing to do with the birth of Jesus, and was merely Christianity co-opting the earlier Roman festival of Saturnalia, and they were pretty much correct on that point. It's actually quite apropos that the holiday's mascot is called Saint Nick, because they nicked all the fun parts from pagans. In 1603, Queen Lizzie was succeeded by King James VI+1, and he and his +1 had a son known to history as King Charles I, who, as any Monty Python fan can tell you, ended his reign about 10 inches shorter than he started it. After decapitating poor old Charlie Rex in 1649, Ollie Cromwell became Lord Protector of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth became a Puritan state. Although an Ordinance of Parliament which abolished the Catholic feast day of the Nativity, as well as Easter and Whitsunday, had been passed 5 years prior, Cromwell was now in an unchallengeable position to see it enforced. From 1656 until the Stuart Restoration in 1660, soldiers of the City of London patrolled the streets on Christmas Day, ensuring that people spent it fasting in repentant humility, and were even ordered to seize any food they discovered being prepared for celebrations. To be blunt, if you lived in Cromwell's England, Christmas was cancelled. This Protestant prohibition on pagan partying wasn't limited to the British Isles either. It was also brought to New England in addition to plain old England classic. As early as 1620, Puritan colonists held the date of December 25th with little regard, and after the holiday's abolition in the Old Country in the latter 1640s, the colonies of Plymouth, Connecticut, and Massachusetts Bay followed suit. By 1659, Massachusetts had enacted a law which punished anyone found guilty of celebrating Christmas with a 5-shilling fine. If my hasty conversions are correct, that's roughly on par with $20 today. Although these laws formally suppressing celebration were repealed in 1681, many die-hard Puritans continued to rail against the holiday and its associated behaviors well into the early 18th century. Gift-giving and revelry, for example, were still frowned upon, and merrymakers could be brought in on ginned-up charges of disturbing the peace. Evergreen decorations such as wreaths, mistletoe, lyrical boughs of holly, and the iconic Christmas tree were also socially discouraged in public settings and expressly forbidden within Puritan meeting houses due to their pagan roots. Outlawed or not, in the minds of Puritans, Christmas was still an abomination governed by misrule. According to New England historian Bruce Collin Daniels, detractors persisted in derisively referring to the Yuletide season as Fool's Tide instead, and once again, a Puritan attempt to insult something just makes it sound more appealing. One of the more vocal opponents of Christmas in the decades following its decriminalization was the Puritan minister, author, and theologian Cotton Mather, whose father, Reverend Increase Mather, referred to Christmas as a profane and superstitious custom. And yes, his first name really was Increase. Puritan names were just like that. Even the Mather's puritanical stubbornness, however, was no match for the glacial march of social progress, slow but inexorable. Although the younger Mather still condemned irreverent behavior in a 1712 anti-Christmas sermon, even he allowed the possibility of observing it as a holiday, and when a third-generation Puritan minister begrudgingly admits that something might be morally permissible, the crusade against it is basically over, bar the shouting. And that's the true story of Christmas, or at least the story of the true war thereupon. It was a pagan holiday hijacked by Christianity, then banned by Christians, more specifically Puritan Protestants, for being too Catholic, and too pagan. And just plain old disruptive. The Protestant Reformation readied the field of battle, and the Puritans were winning for about a decade, or more in the colonies, but by the turn of the century things had run their course, and the holiday came back stronger than ever. You know, like cancer. As a Christian-descended, neo-pagan-adjacent, Jew-ish, agnostic heathen hybrid, my December holiday traditions involve menorahs, trees, recreational mathematics, spending time with the jacks, and checking to see if anyone set fire to the Epp-Leppel yet. However you choose to celebrate, or not celebrate, I wish you a happy holiday season and a fascinating day.